mother of a 16-year-old who started to identify as transgender when she was 13. And Brynne, you are one of the few parents who's willing to talk to me without being hidden and anonymous. And I was just wondering, first of all, how you came to the decision to be willing to speak out about this issue and to be doing it without anonymity.
Oh, that is actually a really good question. So I feel that there are so many people involved in this space that aren't safe enough to speak about the things that we are all experiencing, the things that we're seeing happen in society. And even though they would really like to, they can't. And so far, I've been really well supported by friends and family. And I feel like I have a tiny bit of a platform where I have the safety to be able to speak. And I would feel negligent if I didn't use it.
Wow. Well, thank you, because I think that stories like yours are so important. So why don't you start just at maybe when your daughter started to identify as trans, or maybe even before then?
Before she started to identify as trans, she had always been a very social young lady who had lots of friends, boys, girls. She was very accepting of herself and other people and very confident. She was one of the most confident young women I had ever met. She came home from school one day and she said to me, "Mom, I think I'm the prettiest girl in my class." And a part of me was like, okay, like somebody's a little conceited. And then before I responded to her, I thought about it for a second. And I was like, there has never been a time in my life where I felt confident enough to make a statement like that. So I said to her, wow, that's kind of really awesome that you think that. And she said, don't get me wrong. All of the girls I go to school with are very pretty. I just think I'm the prettiest. And I was like, man, not only is she like full of confidence, but she sees like beauty in all these people. And I was not that nice as a kid. I first off was very, like, my mom used to tell me, oh, you're so pretty. And I never really believed her. I didn't see what my mom saw. So
yeah, I don't know if you were like me, but I used to say, if somebody told me I was pretty, if a relative especially, I'd say, well, you have to say that, you're related to me.
that's how I felt for sure. I don't know that I ever came back with that, and I was super non-conforming as a kid. I mean, I might go outside wearing all kinds of girly clothes because that's what I had in my closet, but I would definitely usually choose cowboy boots and blue jeans if I could. And I wanted to play dirt wars with the boys. We grew up in a neighborhood. It was all dirt roads and woods and wildlife. And I wanted to make mud pies and get worms and go fishing and ride dirt bikes and motorcycles and horses. And like, my daughter was like the complete opposite of me. She wanted to wear princess dresses to the grocery store, like for no special occasion at all. And she wanted to constantly like steal all of mommy's jewelry and all. It just, you would have thought this kid was royalty, you know?
That is so interesting, because based on what you're saying, if you had grown up today, you would have been labeled as transgender, whereas your daughter showed no signs whatsoever of having gender dysphoria.
None. Really none. And I'm not saying that wearing a particular clothing or wanting to wear makeup or a special kind of shoe makes a person a man or a woman, but there are things that we definitely associate more with one sex or the other. And, you know, all through elementary school and middle school, especially middle school, I mean, I wore my uncle's hand-me-downs and big baggy clothes, and you know, I hung with the girls and the boys, but like I wanted to do a lot of boy stuff. And I was not really super girly until maybe the end of 8th grade, beginning of high school. Whereas like you said, my daughter she was very, you know, even sometimes her friends or her friends' parents might make comments like, you know, she seems a little overdressed for the occasion. And she would be like, whatever, this is how I feel my best, you know? But so when she was 13, gosh, we've been through quite a bit of trauma in our lives. We have moved around a lot. My daughter and my son each have different fathers. My son's father passed away of a drug overdose about 5 years ago. And my daughter's father, while he is still involved in her life, is not involved on the day-to-day the same way that I am. We're not together anymore. And I think she has felt a certain level of abandonment in her life. And when she got into middle school, she became friends with a young boy who was very dangerous for her. He was very manipulative and very controlling, and he had her convinced that he had a demon that lived inside of him and that he could travel through space and time. Even if she couldn't see him, he could appear anywhere she was at any time, and he would know what she was doing.
Wow.
He had her convinced that she didn't have to listen to her parents in regards to things like having a physical relationship with him, and that if she didn't want to have a physical relationship with him, it was only because of the things her parents had brainwashed her to believe.
Wow.
He tried to convince her to dress like a boy to meet him in a public bathroom so that they could have some physical contact. And I found all of these things. I had a messenger app set up. You want to keep an eye on your kids, see what they're doing on the internet. And I read through these messages and I realized the level of manipulation and control that was happening in this situation. And I cut off the relationship. I deleted his number out of her phone. I kept her phone for a pretty long time. I had it for several months, actually, after that. And she was very, very heartbroken at first. Like, in her world, she was in love with this person. And, she needed to care for him in some way. All of these crazy things he was going through. And she was angry when I first told her she couldn't talk to him anymore. And at some point, we were in counseling together. She had written me a poem, like a short story kind of poem, and explained how much she felt that I'd actually rescued her in that situation, and thanked me, which was awesome. But around that same time period, she became friends with a trans-identified female, and she and this person just kind of cleaved to one another during this time and space of going through this sort of traumatic experience with this boy and trying to find her footing again. And she and this trans-identified friend of hers had started messaging one another. I'd given her phone back at this point. And I realized through the same messenger app that they were having discussions with one another that were sexual in a lot of ways. And in these scenarios, in these messages they were sending, they were both claiming to be males. And I was like, okay, I don't really, first off, you're a teenager and you can't be having these kinds of conversations. And again, I sought to cut off this friendship because I think it's very hard, especially when you're young, to go from kind of a romantic, sexually charged relationship with a person to pull that back and just have a normal friendship with healthy boundaries. So I think that me cutting that friendship off after this happened really kind of made me an enemy, first and foremost, obviously. And they had grown quite close through these conversations. And I expressed my concerns with her, insisting that she was a boy in these role play scenarios. And I had expressed to her that if she was feeling like she was not herself, it was something we needed to address and get her help for, because the very end of the day, we should all be able to be ourselves and accept ourselves for who we are, and not some sort of idea of who we think we should be. And I tried giving her some examples of different, mental health issues that would cause a person to disassociate with themselves, and how important it is to get help for that. And I wasn't necessarily very kind in all of these conversations, because you feel like you're dealing with a really important, scary thing, and you get excited and emotional, and you get a little charged. And so sometimes I would be rude and I would say things that were just not kind. And I remember her saying to me one day, "Mom, you make this sound so ugly, and I think it's beautiful. And when you say these things, I feel ugly." I was like, oh, okay, maybe we need a different approach. I can't shake this out of her. I can't berate it out of her. I knew very much what it was like to feel a certain amount of disassociation and dysmorphia. As a teenager, I was anorexic. I ate very, very little, and when I did, I often had anorexia, bulimia. So I understand what it's like to look in a mirror and see a body that doesn't match what you feel on the inside. And I know, even when I try to express this to my daughter, she tells me how very, very different it is. And right now, the medical and mental health community would seek to tell us how very different that it is. But just seeing all of the things that are happening, the same level of social contagion. I mean, I saw girls who were very thin and beautiful. I wanted to be like them. I would talk to other girlfriends. We didn't even really have the internet back then, but I would talk to other girls and they would say, oh, well, I stay thin because I don't really eat any food. Like, I had a scallop and a packet of Sweet and Low today. I'm so full. So you have these interactions with your peers in these social situations, and then it becomes your own identity. And then maybe you meet a friend and they're struggling with their weight. And so then you share with them all the same information that you got from, and I'm not saying that gender dysphoria is only a social contagion, but there is absolutely an aspect here. And to be told that we're crazy for recognizing it and for asking for evidence-based practices surrounding it, to be told that we're hateful because we are recognizing a very dangerous thing happening to our children, is insanity to me. You know, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just a really scared, concerned mom. And I know I'm not alone. I know I'm not the only one. And to go through a situation with this child who was very conforming, then all of a sudden goes through a trauma, now identifies as somebody else. And I'm told that the only way to help her is to affirm and assist. I can't believe that. And I feel like it would be wrong for me to just accept that.
Well, and you mentioned a couple of things. The first was that her boundaries were violated. And you said something that I thought was so astute, that once, especially a child, a young teen, a child or a young teen's boundaries are violated, it's really hard for them to reestablish them.
Yes.
And I don't think people understand that. And that's so important. And especially once you've had that degree of intimacy, it's almost, and I know that, you know, some people might jump on me for this, but it reminds me a little bit of a drug. That you take this and you physiologically respond to someone when you're in love, and when you're undergoing sort of this kind of weird trauma, grooming, abusive love kind of thing. It sends off all kinds of chemicals in your body, and it's hard to kind of de-escalate after that.
Yes.
So I think that's something people really need to know, that if you have a child who has been groomed, who has been sexually assaulted, sexually abused, or been in an abusive relationship, you need to really work with them to go back to normal, because they're not naturally going to go back to normal.
No.
The other thing that you mentioned is the social contagion aspect. And I actually remember sitting around with a couple of friends, and we were practicing throwing up. And I was sort of teaching them because I had been bulimic and they wanted to know how to do it. And it reminds me so much of breast binding, you know, like the kind of ways that people talk about it, and the, you know, my body's just not right if I can just get it right. And so even though trans activists will really argue that this is very different than a body dysmorphia, it is fundamentally a dysmorphia, a feeling that there's something wrong with your body. And the dysphoria comes about because you feel so ill at ease with yourself, which is classic of an eating disorder.
Right.
So,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no. So when your daughter, did she just come and say she's actually a boy, or was it a slow development?
So basically, I recognized, based on the dialogue she was having with this friend, what was happening. She didn't outright say to me, I'm a boy. It took her a long time to outright say that, but when I would try to have conversations with her about being a girl, she would argue with me, but she wouldn't outright say that she was a boy. And she said something to me a few months ago, you know, about me having outed her when this first started happening. And I said, I never outed you. I mean, you outed yourself by having this conversation with this other young lady. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like I went out and declared to the world, oh, guess what? I have a trans kid. But what I was dealing with was a child who thought she was a trans kid. And when this happened, I had no idea who to turn to, you know. Before I move on to that, you had said something about the breast binding being kind of like teaching bulimia. The difference in our scenarios in these two things is that when this was happening, when you were going through this, when I was going through this, we were only learning this from our peers. There wasn't a single pediatrician or a single teacher or a single mental health professional that was going to teach our children how, or teach us as children, how to safely puke our food. Right. That wasn't ever going to be a thing, because there is no safe way to do that. But right now, our children are growing up in a world where all of these measures are presented as safe options. Now, is binding your breasts safer than having them removed? Absolutely. but it is still not the best evidence-based practice.
It's
So,
like saying that laxatives are better than throwing up. I mean,
right,
if you
right,
have a body issue, or that, eating 200 calories is better than eating nothing.
right.
You know, and I think that that's so important that you brought up that whole affirmation thing, because kids these days are being told by adults in authority, doctors, therapists, teachers, and other people's parents that it's normal to hate your body, and that it's normal to want to mutilate it and
And they don't,
self-harm.
and they don't even phrase it that way. If they phrased it that way, it would at least be more honest,
Right.
because they phrase it as loving your genuine self, loving your true self. And they make it sound so pretty. They make it sound so positive that you have to be a hateful person to disagree with the narrative. And that's where the biggest part of the problem comes in, is that if you say you want to live as your most authentic self, and I tell you you're not living as your most authentic self, that makes me mean. It doesn't make you inaccurate. It makes me a mean person. It makes me unaccepting, because I don't accept you as an authentic person. And I'm not
You
saying
might even cause me to commit suicide by not accepting me as my authentic self. I
it
mean,
is so,
according to their narrative,
it
you
is
have
so
that much
heartbreaking.
power.
It's very heartbreaking, the level of fear that parents and children are put under in not affirming somebody else's thoughts. It is the same as saying that if somebody does not believe my religion, if somebody tells me that my religion is wrong, I might kill myself. And I'm sorry, that's a huge amount of pressure to put on all the rest of society to accept my religion. I don't see very many other things in this world that are as, I don't even know what the word is I'm looking for, but the level of mental gymnastics that one has to do in order not to hurt somebody's feelings, to prevent them from hurting themselves. I just don't understand what happened to sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I'm not saying words can't be hateful, because they surely can. But for me to recognize a truth and reality and to speak a truth and reality should not be considered violence against somebody. I would never insist that a person should feel so badly that they should kill themselves. I am not a bully. I am being painted as a bully, but I'm not a bully, and I don't want anybody to harm themselves.
And that is so important that we make that clear, that we are being required to affirm somebody else's feelings, or be told that we're hateful, and potentially have the power to cause somebody to kill themselves. And when kids hear this narrative, it just scares me, because they're being taught that their feelings being hurt is grounds for suicide.
Right. And this is very, very personal for me. When I was in high school, I had a very dear friend. She was Jewish also. And for some reason, people started picking on her late middle school, early high school, and started calling her the Nazi elf. She was a really powerful, dynamic, awesome, artistic, intelligent girl. She wrote stories, and beautiful, brilliant stories from like the perspective of perhaps being in a concentration camp in Auschwitz, and about the family dynamic that might happen in a situation like that, and liberation, and just, she was awesome. But yet she still appreciated other cultural things. Like at Christmas time once, she did dress as an elf for a school thing, and kids were so mean and so cruel to her about that. And a lot of them probably really thought they were just joking, but she took it very, very seriously, and she ultimately did go on to claim her own life. And so it's a really big deal to me when I hear people say that this particular thing, just not automatically affirming a person's identity, is going to cause them to kill themselves. I know what it looks like when somebody is being truly bullied. I watched that happen. I tried to stand up for her in situations where I could, but I was not a cool, popular kid either. So it's not like anybody was going to listen to me. I didn't have that kind of power in our like social dynamic.
Well, and there's also a concern now that actual parenting, what is legitimate and important parenting, is now considered bullying. That's a really
Yes.
disturbing thing.
So, okay, so this is going to lead perfectly into getting back to our earlier point. So when my daughter, when we went through this and she told me that she, really thought she might be a boy, I called her pediatrician, panicked, because I was like, how do I help this child? Because I'm thinking back to, again, when I was going through my anorexia and my bulimia, and I know that it would have been very hard to get through to me. It took several years to get through to me, and I didn't want to see my child put herself on a path of self-destruction, especially if we hadn't really identified all of these other underlying traumas that had happened previous to this change in her. So I called the pediatrician and I said, what do I do? And she says, Brynne, you need to call a therapist. And I said, I'm very scared to call a therapist, because what I'm afraid is going to happen is I'm going to call a therapist and they're going to automatically affirm and assist my child. And I don't know that that's really the best approach to start. Am I saying that it will never be the right solution for her? I'm not saying that. I don't know that. A part of me feels, as the kind of holistic person that I am when it comes to our bodies ourselves, a part of me feels that it really shouldn't have to be the solution for anybody. I'm much more of a, like, if you need life-saving operations, fine, go for it. I would never be a vanity surgery person. I couldn't do that. I wouldn't be comfortable with it. And I see this in a lot of ways of being sort of an unnecessary medical procedure, and that aligns in a lot of ways with the vanity procedure. So,
Right. And the thing that bothers me the most about the trans movement right now is they're not suggesting that people just be gender nonconforming or even to identify as the opposite sex. They're pushing this whole medicalization. And to
yes,
me, that is offensive and dangerous. I mean, it's offensive to say that if you're a flat-chested male who wants to dress like a woman, that you should get your breasts augmented, because
right.
women apparently all have big breasts. Or
Apparently.
apparently. And if you're a girl who wants to dress like a boy and be more masculine, that you should have your breasts amputated. I mean, to me, that's just such an unhealthy approach. And so, to anybody who responds that you and I and others like us are haters, I want to say, what are you talking about? You're encouraging people to mutilate their bodies. What is more hateful than that?
Right. Because there are all kinds of shapes of bodies for men and women, and I'm not going to stand here and be some sort of like male rights activist, but I know several men whose chest may not be like that masculine, manly chest. They feel very self-conscious about it. So if you have a small girl who isn't even really very developed, to have her believe that the only way to be male is to have that perfect male chest, like,
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, really, the size of my breasts are probably like closer to what a lot of men's breasts are in middle age.
and when I was going through my horrible dysmorphia when I was younger with the anorexia, I couldn't wait to buy breasts when I was older. I was going to buy the biggest breast you saw this side of the coast, because I did not have a very feminine build, and I was built like a beanpole, and I didn't want to be a beanpole, and I wanted to have what I thought was a womanly shape. It has taken me lots of years to accept that we really do come in all shapes and sizes. And I think that it's offensive and rude for us to reinforce negative stereotypes about one sex or the other in order for people to trans their sex.
Well, especially for this generation coming up, they're now being told that if you're a woman, it means you have, this very feminine look, very busty. And if you're, I mean, it seems like it's going like so far backwards, like
Very
work
regressive.
so hard to try and promote body positivity, that
Yes.
it's okay to have all different kinds of looks, that men and women can look all different ways. And now we're just going backwards, and we're teaching these kids that, this very strict stereotype is what a male is, this very strict stereotype is what a female is. And if you don't adhere to it, you must be gender nonconforming or transgender.
And I think that's the biggest part, is that if you don't agree with the narrative, then some part of you is under the umbrella of trans. Instead of being allowed to be an individual critical thinker, you now have to subscribe to a box. It's like you're pulled out of one box and stuffed into another. There is very little room for freedom of expression in this narrative, unless you go to the super extreme where you have people, think his name is Desmond's, the gentleman with the beard and the dress, and he wants to expand the bandwidth of what it means to be a woman, because he is a male who believes that he is a female. And
even though he has a beard, he still is like ascribing to these regressive stereotypes of what it means to be a woman.
Yes, with the makeup and the dresses and the heels and there's so much confusion. And I really think that a lot of this confusion could be done away with if we were just promoting people to accept themselves as they are for who they are, and to base those decisions on reality first and feelings second.
And health and safety. I mean, to me, health and safety are big. So did you end up taking your daughter to a therapist?
Yes. Okay. So it took me about 9 months to find a therapist that I was really, really comfortable with. We went through a lot of therapists that I wasn't super comfortable with, but not totally uncomfortable with. But in my journey to find a therapist, I would call the therapy office, whichever office it was going to be. And, you get your gatekeeper who answers the phone. And I would explain, I'm a parent who has a, gender nonconforming child, and we are looking to have some therapy. And I'd really like to speak with the therapist, let them know my concerns. I would like to know what their approach to, handling these kind of concerns are. Just kind of want to get a general idea. And one of a couple of things would happen in this phone call. Well, you have to make an appointment to see the therapist before we're able to talk about any of those things. No, I don't. I absolutely do not. So those people were automatically discarded. And then sometimes I would get gatekeepers who would try to say that. And I would say, can you please just take a message and ask the doctor, therapist, psychologist, whoever it was I was reaching out to, ask them please to call me back, let them know this is my message. And sometimes they would. And so those that were willing to speak to me in an initial consultation type phone call, or were willing to call back, I would obviously speak with them. And so now we have a smaller pool that I can pick from. And then I would speak to these therapists and I would explain to them, a little bit about our family dynamics, what it is that I'm specifically calling about, and, what is their course of treatment from here. And some of them would say things like, well, if your daughter says she's your son, then he's your son. Sight unseen. They'd never met this child. And I'm not saying my situation is so unique or so different, or that my child is so special and so unique and so different that, that she needs a special kind of something. But what I will say is, there's no way our story is exactly the same as anyone else's. We all have our own unique stories. I think we all deserve our own unique custom approach to handling different things. And I was not being afforded that. She was not being afforded that. They wanted to put her in a package and send her down the belt. And I didn't want that for her. For any mental health reason, for any physical health reason, we should be basing these things on best evidence-based practices. We should be doing that for all things that are medical and mental health related. And this thing is no different. So after several months, we finally found a family therapy place to go. And at first it was really kind of cool. We had one therapist for myself, my son, and my daughter, and we would all see this therapist individually. And then sometimes we would have group sessions. And this therapist didn't confirm or affirm my daughter's new identity exploration, but she did give her some tools and some ideas of how she could explore that identity and still have a positive relationship with me. And those things seemed really good and positive. I was pretty excited at first. The problem was that my kids would go and they'd have their session with the therapist, and then I would have my session with the therapist, and then we would have our session together. And sometimes the therapist would do this thing where she would look at one or the other of my children and say, wasn't there something you wanted to tell your mom? And I was like, this seems unusual the first time it happens. And my child was just like, no, I'm not ready to talk about whatever the thing was. And so the counselor would say, well, I really think you should probably tell her. And so,
that's gotta be, as a mom, I'm just like, oh, that would just be so uncomfortable.
Right? And like, I want to know things. Absolutely. I'm nosy. I'm mom. I'm a Jewish mother. I want to know. But
any mom would be like, what is it? What is it? I mean, there's so many things it could be.
But that's not how this is supposed to work. That's not how any of this works. So my kids were rightfully offended. And quite frankly, I'm thinking to myself, what if we were on the flip side of that? what if I had said to her, I'm thinking about doing this thing and I'm not really sure how to tell the kids, and then she had flipped that script on me, you know? So we all decided as a family we were not going back to that particular counselor at that center, and we found other therapists. I found mostly those that were willing to allow my child a safe space of exploration without trying to give some level, not that anybody offered conversion therapy. I do want to put that out there. Not one single person I talked to was in any way like, oh, well, we can do this and this will change her mind, and I wouldn't have accepted that. I didn't want my child converted.
I want to clarify for a lot of people that the way people are using conversion therapy now is also really disingenuous, because in some ways the therapist that you just described would have been considered a conversion therapist for not 100% affirming your daughter's gender identity, and that's really scary. And so of course we don't want to take our kids to a therapist who's going to, you know, lambaste them into gender conformity, or torture them or electrocute them. Of course.
Or upset. Like, I don't want anybody to confuse my child's mind. You know? I don't want my child to, I don't ever want there to be some sort of like negative association to change a behavior kind of, I don't want that for my own kid.
But at the same time, a lot of states now have legislation that ban therapists from even questioning, from even exploring.
Which
and
is
that's something
terrifying.
that you have to be so careful of, is if you live in one of those states, you may not want to take your child to a therapist. You might want to find a life coach or somebody else.
I do live in one of those states, unfortunately. So that definitely compounded the problem. I was able to find many therapists who were private practice therapy practitioners. That was worded weirdly. Anyway, but they didn't accept insurance. And here I am, a broke single mom, as I'm going through this time period, the beginning of this, and I couldn't afford $180 a session. But you bet your ass I figured out a way to afford $180 a session to give my child a chance to have somebody who was going to give her space to explore what was going on safely. And like you said, a lot of people would consider that in the definition now that would be conversion therapy. And thankfully, these people were willing to take that risk to offer these kids the best possible care. But that came at a great financial cost for me. And
yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money for anybody, let alone a single mom who's struggling. Right. And one of the things that I've actually heard is that there are some therapists who are letting their licenses expire so that they're no longer under the legislation to being required to affirm these kids.
Right.
Still, it means that you as a parent have to come up with a huge lot of money. But I do want to commend you, because I think in the long run, even though it's a lot of money in the short term, in the long term, it will pay off if your daughter doesn't go on to mutilate her body.
Yes and no. So I kind of had to, how do I put that? I had to find a balance of those two things, because some part of me, even though I question her judgment currently based on the things that are happening, a part of me has to also trust her in some ways to make the best decisions for herself. So getting that little bit of help in the beginning while I could afford it, and having conversation and trying our best to stay a team effort through this, I think has helped in a lot of ways. You know, I've had some parents say, oh my God, you have to get her off the internet, take away her phone, take her from her friends, move her from her school. And when this all first started happening, I really did endeavor to do that. And we did move schools. We've moved schools 3 times now. And my child finds other children that are like her regardless. And I'm not going to pull her out of the social world and bring her home and put her in a bubble. I think that would be as damaging to her mental health as buying into a narrative of, you know, a misreality. So I'm trying to find a balance for her, for myself, with this world. And I'm just hopeful, and I pray a lot, and I have a lot of faith that at some point enough will change for her that she will not have put herself through any damaging chemicals, hormones, surgeries, or experiences. But I think that's part of that push and pull as a parent. You know, I have to also trust her some, even though it's hard because she's a teen. And I think that's reality. I think nobody would argue the statement that it's hard to trust a teenager. Like, you can only give them so much space. But then when you take that very same sentiment and you add it to the trans narrative or the gender narrative, I've started trying to call it the gender narrative, just because it really is, when you get down to it, about gender, which I don't subscribe to begin with on my own.
And I'm really starting to try, instead of talking about gender affirming, I'm talking about transgender affirming, because I think it's important that we start to really be honest with the language. And there, you know, people who affirm somebody who has gender confusion, they are not gender affirming, they're transgender affirming, or they're confusion affirming. And that's something that the trans activists have done a great job of capturing the language so that it sounds so compassionate to affirm
Yes.
somebody. Of course you want to affirm somebody, but really when you talk, what we're doing is we're affirming a transgender, not a gender. Because as you said, putting on different clothes, putting on makeup, chopping off your breasts, that doesn't make you the opposite gender. It doesn't make you the opposite sex. So when you're affirming that, you're affirming a transgender identity, not a gender identity.
And see, and I take it one step further, I think, than you do. And I say, we have sex. We have actual immutable sexual characteristics, and gender are like the feelings that are associated with a sex. But we
Or
are
culture,
sex-bodied
yeah.
people first. So I'm really starting to just anti-gender everything, because I don't think we should have to have this extra separate label of a gender identity. So we have ourselves and our bodies, and everything else beyond that is a feeling or a thought. And so I'm trying to, you know, and I think the reason I'm becoming so specific about my language is, like you said, if you seek to confuse a whole mass of people and make them easily controllable, the first thing you do is confuse their language. So I feel like all of us are trying so hard to find a good, strong, like no frills language to discuss all of this. And I certainly see that it's even hard for people like you and I who absolutely agree on this, but we still see these little nuanced things differently because our language has been so confused. It's so incredibly hard and frustrating. But so we did find a couple of counselors that we did a really good job with, and we now have somebody that is working on a sliding scale, and my daughter is able to meet with her counselor once every other week via a Zoom meeting, because they're not doing any in-person right now. I found a fantastic counselor that works locally to us through Sasha Ayad. Mm-hmm. When this all first started, the first thing I did was reach out to the internet, because I didn't have very many friends or family who were dealing with or experiencing these things this way. So, and the few friends of my daughters that I tried to reach out to their parents, some of them were like, yeah, no, we're not dealing with that. We understand it's going on with our kid, but we're just not dealing with it. We're basically ignoring it. And I was like, okay, well, I'm so not an ignoring parent, you know? Some of these parents say, oh, well, we told her, or we told him, they're not going to dress this way, they're not going to act that way, and that's just how it's going to be. And I'm like, yeah, well, what you people don't realize is I see your kids when they're not at home. Right. And they're doing all the things that you told them not to do. So I don't think that's really the approach that's going to work. Not that I want to tell other parents how to parent their kids, but that certainly wasn't the approach I thought was best.
Well, especially when you have teachers in their schools who will actually, I've heard stories of teachers hiding clothes for students so that wow. When they come to school, they can change. So, wow. So just telling your child not to do it isn't going to be really effective when you have teachers and doctors and therapists and other adults in their lives telling them go ahead and deceive your parent and helping them.
Yeah, not only are they telling them to deceive their parents, but they are painting the parents as the enemy mm-hmm. to our own children. And I just can't think of a more insidious thing that you could do to confuse a child, you know, to tell my child that I am bullying her, that I am bad for her, that I am not a safe person for her, when all I have ever done as a parent is try to provide a safe environment for her. I was speaking with a lady the other day who's getting a collection of parent stories, and she's going to be putting a book together. And I was, where was my train of thought going? We were talking about how these children are being confused by the other adults in their lives, and how they're being told that their parents are hateful, and just how wrong it is that other adults are painting us as parents as the enemy, first and foremost. And then I'm personally so confused because I feel like I have been like the super accepting, very progressive kind of mom. And when we were having this interview the other day, she had said to me, she said, you know, I hear that a lot from a lot of parents that are going through this. It's like these children have found the one thing outside of like drug or alcohol abuse that we just can't support them in, because it is and can be very dangerous for them. It's like they found the one thing she could have done or been or said. I mean, she could have wanted to be, I don't know, a high diver, and I would have been less scared for her than I am in this particular situation. And it seems that over and over again, apparently the narrative has become, it's not just children of super ultra conservative parents who aren't letting them do things. It is even more progressive parents who have, you know, some sort of, I don't know, there's a certain level of freedom, I think, that parents that are a little more progressive give their kids, a little more trust sometimes. And you would think that that would help them become better rounded people, yet somehow they have found themselves in a situation where their experience is pushing really regressive stereotypes and subscribing to very limiting those boxes. Again, we're back to those little boxes.
Well, and I think for liberal parents, that's I definitely raised my kids as a liberal, and tolerant and accepting and all those things. And I think that it hit a lot of us by surprise that
Yes.
that we are busy, you know, loving, accepting, being tolerant, you know, rainbows and unicorns, and we had no idea what was going on in the background. And
Right.
so I think that part of the issue that I have now is that I raised my son, and he's not transgender, but he thinks that I'm just being silly by being concerned about this, because I raised him to be very accepting and tolerant. And I think, you know, we have the Christian conservatives who raise their kids and probably recognized some warning signs maybe earlier, maybe knew what was going on before we did, and so we're able to be maybe more on guard of it than we are, because it never would have occurred to me to be concerned about my son when he decided he wanted to wear Hello Kitty socks and, you know, carry a little purse when he was little. I mean,
Right.
that was fine. Whereas now, if he did
Right.
that now, then wham, somebody would swoop in, I think, and convince him that he's transgender, and he might just go along with it because they're part of that whole group of tolerant LGBTQ rainbow pride people that
Right.
we have tried so hard to be tolerant of.
And it's so frustrating for me, because I have a lot of gay and lesbian friends, and I have had trans identified friends in my past. I don't speak with either of them anymore. And we just kind of drifted apart before this narrative exploded as hard as it did. But I feel like I know with a level of certainty that we would not get along now in our social circles. And I have some very loud friends that are activists and allies to trans people. And in some ways, I totally respect that, because if you're going to be an activist, you're going to be loud if you're going to make a difference. And I understand that. But they are pushing a narrative that is dangerous for the LGB population, first and foremost. And they don't understand or recognize that. In a lot of ways, the LGBT community has been hijacked by this trans and queer and plus community in some very dangerous, very significant ways. It has taken a lot of the progress that my gay and lesbian friends, and women too, all of this progress we have made from like the 50s, 60s, 70s, like so much of that now has just been leveled. People are not as safe now in the LGBT community as they were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago anymore. And a lot of people in a lot of these more conservative Christian groups that were already condemning of the LGBT community now associate the LGBT community with these trans radical activists, and they're even more hateful than they were before. It's just,
Well, and it confirmed that their concern that this was a slippery slope. And so some of it I don't think is hateful. It's this idea that they had seen this sort of the way things were going to evolve if we sort of, you know,
right. But I feel like,
and it sort of confirmed that. It's like all of a sudden they're like, see, this is what we were worried about. And
I get that, I do, but I think the problem is that the trans community, I feel like they sort of knew that they
took
were
advantage
hijacking
of
on the tail end of this. Then yes, people were going to be able to say, see, this is what I knew was going to happen if gays and lesbians were allowed to get married and just love one another. No, this didn't happen
It didn't
because
have to
gays and
happen.
lesbians
Yeah.
love one another. That is not how we found, but
Right.
that is what it looks like. And so when you have a person who isn't a super ultra conservative person who agrees with the narrative of the super ultra conservative people, you now look like you're one of those crazy Christians from like the Westboro Baptist Church, and you just hate all people who are gays and lesbians. And that's not what I'm saying. First off, I don't hate these people.
Well,
I
and that's
hate
where it's like the perfect scenario, because they have this already established where we had really hateful people like the Hillsborough Baptist Church that just were so not Christian. That just,
right.
I mean, in my
Just
mind,
people.
they did to Christians what
But
the
the
trans
trans
movement
community,
is doing to the LGBT.
yes, yes. So yeah, I don't hate trans people. I have some friends now that are online friends. I haven't met them in real life yet, but I'm looking forward to meeting some of them who understand and appreciate and agree with the narrative that women still deserve single women's sex spaces. They don't agree with the violent, angry hatred that is being spewed at the LGBT community, that's being spewed at women. They don't agree with any of that. And wouldn't you know, much like I find when I'm in some of these feminist circles that I'm a part of, I'm often shouted down and told I'm the wrong kind of feminist because I'm not super radical feminist. I'm not a liberal feminist. I'm somewhere in the center. And sometimes that's not enough for either side. So I understand that. But it is frustrating to be told by other women that I'm the wrong kind of feminist. But then my
But
trans
then
friends,
men can be the right kind of feminist. Ah.
yes,
Men who believe they feel like they
yeah.
think they know what it's like to be a woman.
And the liberal feminists are all about that, which I am not a part of. But then my transsexual friends or my other trans identified friends, whether they identify as transsexual or transgender, they are also being told they're the wrong kind of trans because they believe that women deserve to have their own spaces. They believe that they deserve to have their own activism separate of the LGBT community or separate of the women's community. And they do absolutely deserve to have their own activism. Everybody deserves to be able to advocate for themselves and for their group of their lived experience. But that shouldn't mean that one group or another is canceled based on your activism. If your activism cancels somebody else and takes away from their resources, then you have to reorganize your activism in some way. You
Well, in the
cannot.
case of trans activism, these are the feelings of people who are overriding the rights of others. And
Yes.
when we have feelings overriding rights, that becomes really concerning.
When my lesbian friends can't go on to a dating app and put in the specifics of the type of woman they might like to meet, because saying that you're a biological woman lesbian and you want to date other biological women lesbians makes you hateful and gets your profile taken down, then your trans rights activism is now actually literally affecting women's rights to women's spaces. And I'm not saying that's the only example, but that is one of the biggest ones to me, is that women are not allowed to seek the company of other biological women. And I feel like that is a very dangerous thing. We have had one another and have been able to rely on one another. And there have been situations where we wouldn't have made it through certain historical events if women could not come together as women with real women and really advocate for one another and for ourselves. And we're in a position now where it's hateful to do so. And I think that leads me to be angry with my daughter for trying to opt out of her womanhood, to try and not be an ally. I think she and I are really at odds with this because she doesn't want to be a part of those women. And I understand the struggle for sure, but I don't understand how you could just deny somebody else's reality, expect us to affirm yours, and then kind of kick like your sisters to the curb. I don't.
Well, and that's what it feels like to me, is that women are being kicked to the curb. We're being thrown under the bus in order to affirm the rights of primarily what look like autogynephilic men who want to invade women's spaces. And something about your daughter's story is so compelling because your daughter was groomed to dress like a boy in order to go into a boy's bathroom so that they could have a physical relationship.
Right.
And it makes me wonder how many other girls might get talked into this so that, heck, that way they can go on a road trip and stay in the rooms with the boys or go into the locker room with the boys. And it just opens up a whole nother can of worms. And I think about when I became sexualized way too young. And I'm thinking, if this had been an option for me, I would have adopted it in a second. Oh, all I have to do is say I'm a boy. That way I can go into the boys' rooms with my boyfriend and nobody's even going to
Right.
question it. And
Right.
we can make out. And it's just because I'm a gay boy. I mean,
Right.
all of a sudden the boundaries that should be protecting children are going to be gone. And that's really concerning.
What I think has been the worst for me. So we finally do have good counseling, and I'm going to come back to that, I promise.